Alrighty, you guys, welcome back to, I don't know, whatever it is I'm doing at home right now. So today, what we're going to talk about is attribution again, but as a means to review a lot of our different cultures. So we talked about attribution when we finished off Unit 12, and now we're going to attempt to attribute from the various cultures that we studied artworks that you may or may not have seen before. I'm also going to read you passages from this book that I've started reading again called People Who Died During Sex and 100 Other Terribly Tasteless Lists, which is a lot of really useless historical knowledge that's actually quite entertaining. For example, for Selim II, as we know from the Mosque of Selim II, Sultan of the Ottomans, also known as Selim the Sot, he could drink a bottle of Cyprus wine without drawing a breath. When he ran out of his favorite drink, someone suggested he capture Cyprus to replenish his stocks. Selim agreed and massacred 30,000 Cypriot Christians in the process. Pretty great, huh? So, more to come. Just wait. Alrighty, so our first round that we're going to work on attributing are these two artworks. So we'll start with this one on the left. So if we formally analyze it, I can see a high relief carving. So the reason I can tell it's high relief is because of the really dark shadows here. So my foreground is really pushed forward. I'm carving the background away very deeply. So I got high relief carving. I got these markings right here that look like pictographic writing. That's giving me an idea. I have two people. I have what looks to be a man in very ornate indigenous clothing. He wields a lot of power. Check out his giant stick. He also has a very elaborate feather hat. And then down here, what we appear to see is a woman in very ornate patterned dress. And what she's doing is taking barbed wire and pulling it through her tongue, like this. I probably should have done that on camera. Alrighty, so if I'm thinking, I've got maybe a queen bleeding profusely in front of a male next to some pictographic relief carving, lots of shadows. That should remind us of the Mayans at Yaxchilan. This is one of many lintels that's on the ceiling. So I'd have to look up to be able to see the king and the queen. Now this is Shield Jaguar and his wife. This is Lady Zoc. So this is another bloodletting ritual happening. So remember, Lady Zoc would give her divine royal blood to make a political meeting sacred as she's crossing the barrier between real world and the supernatural world. So she's making this political event sacred. We can see a lot of his standards of power, the large staff, the elaborate headdress, elaborate clothing, elaborate jewelry, markings talking about his deeds, because Shield Jaguar was just like a super cool dude. Now remember that Yaxchilan started out as a toll bridge along the, oh shoot, what river did it start along? I'm gonna come back to you on the river. Alright, you know what, let's find out. We'll find out together, y'all, because I think the river is important. We're going to be using Zoom later, just so you know. All right, Yaxchilan River. Usumacinta River. I feel like there's a better Usumacinta. Really? I felt like there was a different river. Okay. All right, back to whatever we were talking about. This is along a river. I'm next to a river. What do you know? So... there we go. So along this river, it was a toll road, so you'd stop and pay for your goods. It eventually gets remodeled by Bird Jaguar and turned into this sacred event. They would hold ceremonial gatherings, sacred gatherings, bloodletting gathering, etc. So Bird Jaguar is Shield Jaguar's son. By the time that Yaxchilan and this lintel are built, Shield Jaguar is totally dead. And this is designed and built by Bird Jaguar, his son. This was a way to honor his father's deeds, but also justify his rule, because Bird Jaguar takes over the throne, and he sort of has to prove himself, like, well, I have this divine lineage, my mom is under the supernatural territory, my dad was this super cool ruler. It's sort of like how George W. Bush gets into presidential office based on the good deeds of George H.W. Bush, his father. So spending a lot of time justifying your lineage and the good deeds of your father is a way to win over the people of Yaxchilan and all of Maya, the Maya territory, by talking about the deeds of your father and how cool he is, and therefore how cool you are since that's your dad. Now this is a sacred event. We're entering the supernatural world, hence the high relief carving with the shadows that play on light versus dark. A lot of these bloodletting ceremonies will be around fire or at night in the shadows to sort of create this trippy atmosphere. All right, moving over to this guy. What I can see is a human figure, and he is stylized. Notice his D-shaped eyes. I also see these carved out of wood that's been heavily polished. I can see that he's seated in a very pensive pose. So he's got his arms like this and his feet are crossed. This should remind us of a sculpture that we study. Can you think? Endap of Mishi by the Kuba people. So it's very similar to Kuba people's material, this shiny wood. It's very similar to the stylized figural form of Africa and this pensive leader. And we can tell he's a leader because of his elaborate hat up here. And he also seems to have a very decorative throne. So this is probably another endop of a different king. So honoring something that leader had done in his life, and then he receives an endop. After he dies, his spirit will go into that endop that will go live in the new leader's house as a means of like educational osmosis spiritually. And then his spirit leaves and goes in the afterlife. But we keep this around as a reminder of oral history. One of the reasons why Africa is so super cool is because of the honoring of oral history, which promotes those interpersonal relationships between the generations to explain the nuances of history as it's being passed down. So over here we have the Maya, over here we have the Kuba people. So if you see something like this and you're like, oh, Africa, we can't attribute it to Africa. Africa's a whole continent. So you have to think of culture or location, something more specific than the whole continent of Africa. Because you wouldn't see something, if I go back up here, both of these are from Asia, but they're both from two very different cultures. Over here I have India, over here I have China, so I couldn't just say, well, it's Asian. That's much too broad. That's an entire continent. So you have to really narrow it down. So this is by the Kuba people, likely an endop figure. All right. Oh, no, I'm going to save that one for later. Alrighty, so I got two new artworks right here. We'll start with the one on the left. So if I look, I see some human figures. They are red with a black background. I see an attempt at naturalism. I see some composite stance, but some three-quarter view. I see, horizontal lines, registers. Some people are on the lines and some people are off the line. And I have this vase with decorative handles, possibly a crater. This should remind us of classical Greece. So this is very similar to Niobedes crater in its red figure technique. So remember, when terracotta comes out of the ground and it's fired, it's that reddish rust color like this. When they initially decide to start painting on it, they have black glaze, so black paint. You have red vase, black paint. Initial idea thought is, well, I'm going to paint some black figures on there. But one, the skin tone of a Greek is not black, and two, we can't add very much detail. So we see a lot of revolution or evolution with this pot, with this ceramic vessel. So the red figure technique is one, indicating classical Greece. And then two, some of our figures are overlapping and off the register as we're trying to attempt more naturalism. So creating that more foreground, middle ground, background, and sense of depth to create naturalism. Military emphasis, military deeds. Greece was really known for their military paintings, even though most of them don't survive. We do have very many of their ceramic vessel paintings talking about the greatness of their military. And then, of course, the shape is a crater. So craters would often have a hole in the bottom, and it would be used to pour wine in or libations that would fall through as an honor in a funerary ritual. All right, go over here. Oh, no, I have something of Greece to show you from the people who died during sex book. Okay, let me find it. All right, Alexander the Great. So he's from classical Greece. The Macedonian king who ruled an empire stretching from Greece to India was in his lifetime as famous for his marathon drinking sessions as for his military conquests. During one of Alexander's drinking contests, 35 men died. During another, he killed one of his best friends with a spear. His close friend Hephaestion expired after drinking half a gallon of wine for breakfast. Alexander dropped dead after a drinking contest at the age of 32. Things you didn't know about Alexander the Great. Alrighty, next artwork. We have this guy over here. So I see a bronze statue of a male figure by himself. Let's see, he's in a toga. Contrapposto stance. So notice how this knee is popping out and one leg's coming forward. And then I have the raised arm. So that would be, can you remember what the raised arm stance is? Oratory stance. So likely addressing a military. So this is a Roman statue. This is likely Imperial Rome because of the idealized male figure in the oratory stance. So that should remind us of Augustus of Prima Porta when we start seeing more imperial emperors. So here we see likely an emperor, maybe addressing the military, but because he has the toga on, he might also be addressing the Senate, hence the toga and the lack of military attire, but still leading or addressing somebody, showing that he's in charge. That is political ideology. All right. Back to the book on Rome. Let me find about Emperor Nero. Not that one. Let's see. Aha! AD 67. So that's 67 CE. Roman chariot racers doped themselves and their horses with mysterious herbal infusions, including a solution of dried boar's dung to promote muscle growth in the search for speed. Emperor Nero outcheats them all when he competes in the AD 67 Olympic Games and bribes judges to declare him chariot champion, despite the fact that he had fallen out and failed to finish the race. So, you might remember Emperor Nero as having the Colossus statue in front of the Flavian Amphitheater that we know as the Colosseum. The Flavian Amphitheater is originally built for these, Olympic Games, gladiator games, horse races, etc. And then Nero constructs this huge, enormous sculpture of himself outside the Flavian Amphitheater. They call that statue the Colossus, and thus the building next to it, the Flavian Amphitheater, as the Colosseum. Now, and Nero was a total cheap bag. Alrighty, moving right along. Alright, these two are so incredibly easy, I swear to God. Alright, over here, we see composite stance. So composite is where you're trying to show as much area of the human body as possible. I see registers. I see human heads combined with, or animal heads combined with human bodies, and hieroglyphic writing. What could that be? Could it be New Kingdom Egypt from the Book of the Dead? So this looks very similar to Last Judgment of Hu-Nefer from the Book of Osiris or the Book of the Dead. So we have a person being led to judgment, and he's having the heart weighed with a feather. And in this one, which is actually pretty funny, you can see that the heart is lower than the feather. So that means they have something weighing on their consciousness. So Home Slice, I forget his name. It's like whatever. So we got Anubis like weighing it. Home Slice is ticking it off, and then Asmet, or something like that. Asmet is the, what's it called? The creature that's going to consume him. So this is where this page actually ends. Because this person has been deemed bad, they have a bad conscience, they're going to be fed to this half crocodile, half cheetah, half lion, half bear entity. And so there's no Osiris at the end because they don't make it. So this is New Kingdom Egypt. We're returning to normal after the hilarious Amarna period that I love so much with, who's our pharaoh that's absolutely insane? He says something Aten. Why am I so stupid right now? Not Akhenaten. Yes, Akhenaten! Alright, so this is after Akhenaten goes crazy and we're returning back to normal. This is also made on a papyrus scroll. Papyrus grows readily on the Nile River, and you just like roll it up and then unfurl each thing, and that's how they read the Book of the Dead. Alright, New Kingdom Egypt. Over here, we have a relief carving. I see an eagle head, let's see, eagle wings, what looks to be perhaps a human body. If I were to formally analyze, I see emphasis on muscle, so strength, but also beauty in the robes and the feathers and the hair. Let's see, fine details and texture in the wings and the hair, smooth skin. This should remind us of the Lamassu of the Assyrians. So this is Apkallu. He's actually one of the other guardian deities who's known for having a special handbag and a special pine cone that nobody really understands why he has those special things, but they're his symbols, and that's his pine cone, and it shall be his pine cone. So we could relate that to the Assyrians, so Ashur-Nasir-Pal and Assur-Banipal and all those homies of the Citadel of Sargon. So all of that could be related. So fairly low relief carving, contrast and smooth and texture, highly detailed feather and hair, anthropomorphic form, mix of strength and beauty, all leading us to believe that this is an Assyrian deity. Alrighty, back to some racism, you guys. Let's check out this painting over here. So I see a dark-skinned woman wielding a weapon of some kind. She has European-style dress on, and she is attacking a white man with colonial or European outfit. And then I have this like, let's see, a mid-tone skinned individual child at the bottom. Alright, what can that remind us of? Racism, racism, racism. Oh, cast paintings from 18th century Mexico. So this documented the inter-ethnic mixing of Spaniards or Europeans with the indigenous members of Mexico, essentially. So what the cast paintings really desired to do was elevate European ancestry. So the less European that you were, the less moral you were. So here we see this very violent female. Notice how she has super dark skin, indicating again that she is incredibly immoral and uncivilized and not classy. The Spaniard and Indian produced mestizo that we know from Juan Rodriguez, notice or remember how that female was a lot lighter complected. She still was tan, but she wasn't as dark and therefore was a little bit more classy. So that elevation of that light complexion. And then here we have this tormented mestizo child not committing any wrongdoing because they have that European blood, but the mother is. So preferencing European blood and status over anything else. Alright, so cast painting, C-A-S-T-E, painting, cast painting. Alright, over here, let's look at this one. So I have a building, an architecture, highly ornate, lots of decoration, exterior modification. I have a lot of steeples, boom, boom, boom. Let's see, my sides aren't equal, so it's asymmetrical. Sets of 3, 1, 2, 3. There's a funnel on them, so lots of people are coming into this. Let's see, what else can I use to describe it? A large central rosette window. So this comes from which period? The Gothic period of Christianity. So notice the funneling here, so funneling the pilgrims in to come visit the relics. The figural jam statues, so visual reminders of the Old and New Testament. They would put Old Testament figures on the bottom, New Testament figures on the top, so sort of a new building off of the old. We saw that last with the Colosseum, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian capitals. Let's see, sets of three, Holy Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. Asymmetry, creating excitement, Abbot Suger, really into that asymmetry. And then the rosette window is a reference to Chartres Cathedral, so that sacred feminine housing the tunic of Virgin Mary. However, this is a different Gothic cathedral. It's just based on that idea of Chartres Cathedral and the Cathedral of Saint Denis. So again, Gothic, highly ornate. Oh my God, pointed arches. I mean, hello, that should have been really obvious to me to indicate this was from the Gothic period. And what you sort of can see here is the stained glass windows. I know it's very hard with this setup that I got going on. I got stained glass windows, sacred geometry, and the Kames and bar tracery. I also see the golden ratio or the golden Fibonacci proportion sequence in here. And that talks about how we see God reflected in nature. God is the ultimate architect. Ferns unfurl in the golden ratio. Nautilus shells form in the golden ratio. Waves unfurl in the golden ratio. So things I see in nature, all following the exact same mathematical pattern, is telling people that God's a thing. So we see that reflect in the facade and exterior of Chartres Cathedral. Or do I have anything cool for that one? No? Alrighty. Let's start with this one over here. So I see registers. I see super, 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 super high relief carving, and we call that undercut. So the fact that this like horse head is totally off the background and totally separate, we call that undercut. And the only way to do that is using a Roman drill. So we're looking at a Roman sculpture. This is a frieze or maybe part of a sarcophagus. We can see a lot of military reference, so that's really indicating Rome because Rome loved their military. And that Roman drill used to get that undercut, that super duper high relief. They were also known for a lot of horror vacui, just shoving as many human figures as possible. That should remind us of the Ludovisi sarcophagus from Imperial Rome. All right, over here, let's see, we got some figures in a fresco. They are dancing and having a very convivial time. This should remind us of the Etruscans. So the Etruscans particularly viewed the afterlife as convivial. It was something to be celebrated. You're getting to go to this house with no responsibilities anymore. It's meant to be super cool. So on the inside of the tombs, like the tomb of the Triclinium, we would see frescoes of people dancing. Notice the ornate party clothes, the difference in male versus female. Men are painted darker, females are painted lighter because they should stay their asses inside. So Etruscans were really into that concept of that convivial atmosphere, the celebration of death for them and their necropoli. It was something to look forward to. So this would be painted inside of a tomb on the walls to sort of promote that convivial atmosphere. So to remind you of the funerary ritual of the Etruscans, remember Etruscans are pre-Rome, so super, super old, BC era, like 5th or 6th century BCE. So let's say, I'm gonna pick a home slice. David Diaz. All right, David Diaz lives a good life and then he dies. So what we do is we put David Diaz's body on a couch in his new afterlife home in the tomb of the necropolis, and we have dinner for 3 days with David Diaz's dead body. I mean, even though David Diaz is super stoked to no longer have to do assignments and no longer, attend school, he's still a little bummed to leave people behind. That's really the only thing that made people sad about Etruscan afterlife, is you have to leave some people behind. So we have dinner with David Diaz's dead body on this couch for 3 days, and then we set him on fire, and we put him into his sarcophagus, and the sarcophagus stays in the home of the necropolis, so a city of the dead. So they had remember those bubble homes, and they had roads between them, so I could go visit David Diaz whenever I wanted to. Maybe I don't, maybe I do, who knows? So that celebratory feast was super important to help transition into the afterlife, sort of like a farewell dinner for a couple of days for David Diaz. Now that leads me to, let's see, where's a good one that I had? Oh, Ecuador. Alrighty. The most generous last will and testament of all was left by Ecuadorian Indian endo-cannibals, cannibals who eat and are eaten by members of their own family after their death. Their will gave express details of which body parts were to be eaten by which lucky relatives. As soon as the will was read, the funeral became a banquet, as the corpse was roasted, cut into pieces, and consumed by grieving relatives. The head was generally kept until it was ripe with maggots, then the brains were eaten with spices. Isn't that great? I freaking love this book. Again, if you're interested, people who died during sex and 100 other terribly tasteless lists. I've read this like at least 15 different times, and every time it's quite hilarious. All right, more to come. Let's see, who else do I have to talk to you guys about? Oh, the church. That's so great. That's me for the next one. Alrighty, let's talk about this one over here. So, I'm sorry again about the super poor quality of the images via video. So, I see human figures. Let's see what looks to be perhaps a woman and a child, but the child's a little bit strange because it's like old man face but small body. Let's see, we have gold plate halos being emphasized, random angels in the background, gold background, let's see, and a stylized face, so elongated and geometric. So that elongated human form, emphasized halo, gold background should also remind us of the Gothic period. This is definitely medieval Christianity. We haven't gotten to the Renaissance yet because it's not naturalistic. There's no empirical science happening here. And the gold background is really indicating the Gothic period. Gothic period loved using gold in the background. One, it was an expensive, sumptuous material befitting this, religious subject of Jesus and Mary. But two, the gold would indicate that it is timeless, that this is a continual thing, that it doesn't happen on earth, it's transcendent, and it's divine. So not of this world, of this otherly world, this super divine world that we are separate from. It's not until the Renaissance that we start putting recognizable backgrounds in, like the Arno Valley or a contemporary Renaissance home, because we want our divine figures to feel separate, to feel better or different than us. So definitely medieval Europe, which leads me to, let's talk about the church for a second from the book. So the church adopted celibacy as a code for the priesthood in 1123. So all priests had to be celibate, abstain from sex in 1123. 350 years later, Pope Innocent VIII became known as the Honest, Pope Innocent the Honest, because he admitted that he had fathered several bastards. He owned up only to disprove a rumor going around Rome at the time that he was a woman. I love the church, man. Alrighty. So moving on to this image over here. So if you watched my previous video, this should be recognizable. I have what looks to be a bag. We have some abstracted shapes, organic lines around the shape, so thin white contour lines. It's asymmetrical, even though it is geometric. I see red and blue. I see fringe. This should remind us of the bandolier bag by the Lenape people. So what about this is Lenape? the animal material of leather, the fringe over here on the flap, and let's see, what else? Oh, the red and the blue. So the blue is the celestial sky, the red is the underworld, that's their supernatural and spiritual belief. Now, what's European about it? The beads are coming from exchanges with Europeans. The beads are Italian. Let's see. Oh, the shape, the European military bag shape. Now, when the Lenape initially adopt this bag, it is just for social power. It'd be worn at gatherings to show that you have made trade with the Europeans, that you have wealth to afford these beads. It was just worn at ceremonial gatherings. It didn't give you political power, but it was a social status thing. You just wore it across your chest, kind of like the Miss America pageant. It had no function other than to communicate social power. It's not until many, many years later that they decide, like, oh man, like, what if I open the flap and I put things inside? Then it becomes everyday use, and our vocab term for that is utilitarian. It is utilized for everyday use. So once they open the flap and start putting, like, I don't know, their Coca-Colas inside, then it becomes utilitarian. Alrighty. I have no idea. I have two more. Okay, two more slides, so 4 more artworks. I know I got 30 minutes in, but like, the book is funny, come on. All right, so I'm looking at this painting right here. It's a large scale painting. I see it's mostly nature, but nature is violent. So I see crashing waves. I see this guy pulling out a dead lady body. So nature has murdered people. Some rough brush strokes that are blurry, unblended. That should remind us of which art historical movement? Romanticism. So Romanticism really emphasizes feeling. So the violent, destructive nature, death, the rough brushstrokes communicating the violence of nature again, but also that feeling of torture. These much smaller humans compared to gigantic nature, so the insignificance of humanity. And of course the storm in the background. God is in turmoil about what's happening with humanity. All right, going over here. So this is a portion of a textile. It's actually on display at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. One of the things that I'm super sad about is that we won't get to go to the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston on our field trip, because we would get to see this in person. It is pretty cool. So it's textiles. I'm going to sort of explain it to you. There's a human with very elaborate dress, very elaborate cloak, snakes coming out of the nose, so snakes coming out of the nose, and then holding up another individual on top. So the narrative going on here is that a divine individual, hence the snakes coming out of the nose, is sacrificing another individual. So that should remind us of, think. Inca or pre-Inca with Chavin de Huantar. So textiles were a common form of social and political power because of combining multiple elements together, the cotton with the camelid fiber, beach versus mountains, but also because the mountains in the Incan, Peruvian territory is very cold. So wearing a very elaborate cloth would indicate your power. However, this cloth was used for a much more sacred purpose. So do you remember the human sacrifice ritual of the Inca and pre-Inca? So we nominate a person, and usually they would go along with it. They typically were okay because they wanted to keep the world going. So we would beat that person to death, or almost to death, and then while they're like struggling to stay alive, we wrap them with the cloth, and then we bury them in the ground like the seed pods to feed Mother Earth. You might remember a story I told about 10 years ago. They discovered this mass grave of about 400 children and 200 llamas because they had a very similar event to El Nino, so just a series of hurricanes and typhoons just pummeling the coast and pummeling their territory. They kept losing people, money, resources, everything, food, So in order to appease the natural gods, they had this mass sacrifice of children. You had to sacrifice people with importance. Otherwise, it didn't indicate a sacrifice. Sacrificing a slave did not show your devotion or dedication to the god, so it had to be someone of importance. So we see that person also has importance. They're holding snakes, elaborate clothing and dress, but this was the shaman or the oracle leading that ritual. So snakes coming out of the nose. So back to snakes. If you remember from Chavin, one of the things they dug up is that nose ornament of the snakes. So snakes are commonly associated with indigenous American deities. The snakes are also looking up towards heaven. They're made out of gold. Gold is used to represent the sun god Inti, and it's placed at the nose, which is a direct channel to the brain, because the oracle is the only one that can actually talk to the deity. And this guy is about to go on a trip to meet the deity by going underground as a human sacrifice. All right, what else do I have in my book to read to y'all? Let's see, I told you about the church. Let's see, I told you about the Roman chariots. Oh, this one's funny. All right. Emperor Ferdinand I of Austria marries 17-year-old Princess Maria Anna of Sardinia. Thanks to centuries of Habsburg royal inbreeding, Ferdinand is severely physically and mentally handicapped and is both epileptic and encephalitic, which is a brain disorder. His only recorded coherent remark on any subject was, "I am the emperor and I want dumplings." That's his only recorded coherent thought. During the wedding night alone, he has 5 epileptic attacks. There are no children. So if you remember, the Habsburgs were all about royal inbreeding to keep the royal blood pure. Really good idea, right? All right, last one. All right, let's start with this one over here in the corner. So I see a wooden sculpture of a 2-headed animal with some nails, some metal objects pounded in. So let's think about what that would be. Very similar to the Nkisi power figure. So of the Congo people, okay? Kongo, Congo, Nkisi of the Congo. I'm right? We'll see. Let me see. So what I do see is a natural figure, so an animal in this case made out of wood. That would be created by the artist. And then the priest is driving in the nails when there's a problem with society. Now you'll notice a change. We're looking at an animal. You may have remembered this from the Menil Museum. Because this is an animal, that tells me that this has to do with natural phenomena, not human problems. So it could be that my animals aren't producing enough milk, or they're not reproducing enough, my chickens aren't reproducing enough, I'm running out of food, or my agriculture is not working. There's something going on with the natural world that's causing a problem. It could be raining too much or too little, so we would use this version of an Nkisi to combat those natural phenomena, those natural problems. All right, and that comes from, the nails come from the crucifixion story brought over from colonizing Europeans, likely the Dutch or the British. Alrighty, over here, let's look at the painting we're looking at. You can't see all of it, so sorry. So I see a painting, large scale, with muted color tones. Let's see, I see some rough brush strokes if I look around this small child over here. Very imbalanced. It's got like a lot of space in the middle, rando people placed all around. And if I look at these people, they seem very poor. So they have tattered, ragged, rundown clothing. That should remind us of... I lost my water bottle. It should remind us of realism, very similar to Gustave Courbet's Stonebreakers. So at the time of realism, Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto is making the rounds. There's this renewed interest in the plight of the working class, this cycle of poverty. We see that cycle of poverty over here, old man, young boy. So he will grow up to be just like that man. He will never escape poverty. There's no resources around. It's run down. Nothing on the horizon. They have nothing in their future. Again, the cycle of poverty. Muted tones to represent real life. Everything indicating realism. Alrighty, that's it. Y'all want one more thing from the book? Let's see. Alright, St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis listed personal filthiness among the insignia of piety, in line with the early teachings of the Christian Church, which held that dirtiness was next to godliness, and that bathing was an evil, ungodly vanity, punishable by an eternity in hell. One 4th century Christian pilgrim boasted that she hadn't washed her face for 18 years. St. Anthony never washed his feet. That's the guy with the tongue. And St. Abraham didn't wash his hands or feet for 50 years. And St. Sylvia never washed any part of her body except her fingertips. Wow. Ludwig van Beethoven, the German composer, had such a disregard for personal cleanliness that his friends had to take away his dirty clothes and wash them while he slept. Ooh, and next one's Chairman Mao. Chairman Mao, the Chinese communist leader, never took a bath or brushed his teeth. The latter on the grounds that tigers never brush their teeth either. He achieved an epic personal hygiene problem that grew steadily worse as the years went by. The septuagenarian, so 70 years old, having several young concubines rub his body down with hot towels instead of bathing. Gross. Alrighty. Oh, Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, the Mongol ruler's warriors, were a superstitious bunch who believed that washing was a sacrilege. There was also a more practical reason for the lax approach to ablutions, the washing. The thick crust of dirt that covered their bodies throughout their lives helped them withstand temperatures as low as minus 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Khan's men used their lack of hygiene as a weapon of psychological warfare. Their enemies could smell the festering Mongol hordes long before they could see them, and were often paralyzed with fear by the time they arrived. This book is so high quality. All right, thanks for tuning in today. I hope to hear from you guys soon. Send me a text or an email about anything you want me to review. Otherwise, you're just getting rando stuff. All right, bye. Love y'all. Miss y'all.